Hi everyone, this is Nick Pollock here from Roar Lions Roar. While you're here, be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that alert bell so you never miss any of our new content. And if you prefer to listen instead of watch, make sure you check us out on your podcast platform of choice where you can subscribe and download each new episode. Thanks for watching and thanks for listening. Go State!
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this edition of Roar Lions Roar. I'm your host, Bill DeFilippo, and I don't have a co-host with me today. We're doing a Roar Lions Roar Classic, which is a solo show where it's just me sitting here and talking with you about Penn State football. We know this episode is dropping a little bit late this week. We do apologize. As you could probably guess, we wanted to give everyone else with the pod an opportunity to be able to join. Nobody was able to. Also had some technical difficulties that made it so I'm going to be going in alone this week. I also want to apologize in advance. I caught a cold. I'm on the other side of it, shaking the last little bits of it. But on occasion, you might hear me take a second to just compose myself. Might hear me cough once or twice. But fortunately, not as bad as it was couple of days ago. I can at least sit up and talk to you now, which I don't know if I was able to do on Tuesday or Wednesday this week. But that's enough of an update on me. As always, we're here to talk about Penn State football, and Penn State's going to be taking on Kent State this week in Beaver Stadium, an opponent that Penn State has played a few times in the past. They're a program with which Penn State is a little bit familiar. They're in their second year under head coach Kenny Burns, who took over after Sean Lewis went to Colorado to become Deion Sanders' offensive coordinator for a year. Went 1-11 last year. Might be hard for them to win one game in 2024. A team that's really struggled to get off the ground this year. They were the first team that Joe Moorhead played. Penn State had a 33-13 win over them to kick off the 2016 season. Apologies. And they played again in Beaver Stadium in 2018. Penn State blew them out 63-10. And we're going to talk a bit about Kent State as the pod goes on. We're going to talk about them a little bit later. But before we do that, we need to start with the big news in the Penn State football world. It's news that came out earlier this week. Excuse me. It's news that I don't know if it's shocking, because it sure seemed like something was up with KJ Winston during Penn State's game against Bowling Green. Obviously only played a little bit at the start of that game before they hooked him and put him on the sideline for the remainder of the game. But it was announced this week that Winston is out with a long-term injury. James Franklin told the press they're just not going to have KJ Winston for a while. And it's unclear if a long-term injury means he's back in a month. It's unclear if a long-term injury means he'll be back before the end of the regular season. It's unclear if a long-term injury means if Penn State makes it to the playoff or goes to a really prestigious bowl game, he will participate in it. Or it's unclear if a long-term injury means that he just needs to get his body right to go to the NFL. KJ Winston's a guy who is going to be playing a lot of football at a very high level for a very long time. And this injury, like any injury, is a big concern when you are someone who is going to be playing a lot of football at a very high level for a long time. Again, we don't know exactly what the injury is, but it's a big enough deal that it sure sounds like KJ Winston is not going to be with the Penn State football program on the field. We don't know what his role is going to be. We don't know what his role is going to be long-term, if he's going to, how much he's going to be around the team. Hopefully he's going to be around the team and be a bit of a mentor to whomever fills in for him. But he seems like the kind of guy who would do that. But when it comes to losing a player of KJ Winston's caliber for an extended period of time, I think that's a disaster for Penn State's defense. So much of what Penn State wants to do on the defensive side of the football is predicated on the fact that KJ Winston is out there. If you want to make the argument that he is the best player on Penn State's defense, I'm sure there are going to be people who would disagree and say Abdul Carter, or maybe AJ Harris is climbing up that climbing up that list, whatever you want to say, totally fair. He's definitely in the conversation for the best. I would argue he is, regardless of that, the most important player on Penn State's defense. It's a thing that we've mentioned in the pod. Penn State's safety room has three really, really good football players at the very top of it. Zaki Wheatley is going to play a ton of football, has played a ton of football, is a very good football player. Jalen Reed, going to play a lot of football, is a really good football player, is going to continue to be a really good football player. But having KJ Winston at the back end of Penn State's defense opens up so much stuff for how Tom Allen's defense is able to operate, namely by putting Reed in that oversized slot corner hybrid type of role, where, as we saw during the West Virginia game, when he's freed up to do that, it makes life easier on everybody else on Penn State's defense. And, we're going to have to see if Reed is going to, how they're going to manage this. Are they going to want to keep Reed in that spot and basically say to a guy like Dewan Lane, the true freshman that even before this came out, they appear to be very, very high on, hey, Dewan, fill in at the back end of our defense so we can have Jalen roam and impact games in the way that he can. Are they going to have to move Reed back into that spot and put a third linebacker on the field, a linebacker position where Penn State is very thin, especially due to the fact that Abdul Carter is playing off the edge right now? Tamir Robinson does sound like he is going to be back sooner rather than later, whether that means he's back at 100% or whether that means he's on a bit of a pitch count. Who knows? But do they go with a third linebacker? Tony Rojas is not going to be coming off the field anytime soon, but how do they handle that class of dudes that, Dom DeLuca is in there, Kobe King is in there, Tyler Elsdon is in it, Tamir Robinson getting folded back into it, some of the younger guys that they have like Akari Jackson and Anthony Specca, Dakari Nelson, do they get on the field in some capacity? Do they slide a cornerback in there and go with, when we talk about Penn State's defense having that 4-2-5 construction, it's with three safeties and two cornerbacks. Are they now going to go with three cornerbacks and two safeties and slide someone from their very deep and very talented cornerback room, Jalen Kimber, AJ Harris, Cam Miller, Elliott Washington, Audavian Collins, all guys who have played a good amount of football this year? Do they put one of them in that slot hybrid corner role, see what they can do there, and just have Reed and Wheatley take away stuff farther down the field? There is a lot of directions that they could potentially go here. It's interesting to see how they end up handling that, because I think we can kind of tell, when we look through how Penn State's defense handled Tony Rojas missing some snaps against Bowling Green or something like that. They didn't just automatically move Abdul Carter back there, put in Amin Vanover and Denai Dennis Sutton as their edge rushers, and just go with that. It seems like a safe assumption. Yeah, maybe they're going to say we want to use Abdul as a linebacker in specific situations, but it seems like they're going to keep Abdul Carter at defensive end. Okay, so now there's if you want to say the second level of the defense, some questions, some potential weaknesses, whatever at linebacker. That means, a guy like Tony Rojas isn't necessarily going to be playing with two other more conservative linebackers next to him. They're maybe not a 4-3 base defense or anything like that. So there's a lot of stuff a lot of ways they can approach this. We can make assumptions that they're going to want their starting defensive line to be Carter and Dennis Sutton with a rotation of defensive tackles, guys like Smith Vilbert and Amin and Vanover getting folded in every now and then. But in the big moments, that's what they want to keep. Do they want to just keep two linebackers on the field? Do they want to go with three safeties if that means pushing a guy like Dewan Lane into playing more and sooner than they expected? Do they trust that a guy like Tyrese Mills, who has been in the program for a long time, Lamont Payne, who is making the transition from corner to safety, can give them a little something? Yeah, there's just a ton of questions that now pop up. And you obviously you never want to say the word fortunately in this situation. The fact that KJ Winston is not going to be out there for Penn State really sucks as a person, as a player, whatever you want to say. Like, he's a spectacular football player. He is an unbelievable football player. And I think it says a lot about his commitment to his team, to his teammates, to Penn State, to Penn State fans, that he tried his hardest to play against Bowling Green. He gritted his teeth, went out there and did what he could with an injury that we now know is going to be considered a long-term injury. That says a ton about him as a dude and as a football player. And it sucks to see, beyond what it means for Penn State's defense. You never want to see anyone get hurt, obviously, but you especially don't want to see someone who cares, who really gives a shit about being the best possible representative for his team, lose out on a spot because it's taken away from him by his body. So you hope that he can get healthy. You hope that he can come back a little bit farther down the line. If there is a silver lining for Penn State, it's that despite the fact that the game against Bowling Green was ugly and not necessarily a fun watch for all of us, they were able to start to figure out, okay, if we're going to lose KJ for a period of time, how can we adjust to that? They survive against Bowling Green. Second half against Bowling Green, we read the stats. Defense ended up playing considerably better than it did in the first half. After that, you go into a bye week where you could start to piece together what your game plan is going to be for when you get back onto the field. You then get this week, a full week of practice, a full week of going into a game against an opponent that you should be able to overpower and you should be able to take care of business against relatively easily. And you can start to piece together we know what this situation looks like for Penn State. We understand what this means for our roster. We understand what it means for all of these things. And we are now able to get actual real game reps, actually figure out how we want to handle the absence of KJ Winston, which there's no good answer for it, but you can at least start to put together an answer for it, which is really all that you can hope for in a situation like this. And again, I hope we end up seeing KJ Winston back sooner rather than later. I hope we see him play football for Penn State again. It's not going to take away from the fact that we know this guy's a good football player, but it really sucks if our final memory of him as Penn State football fans is a guy who got hurt, a guy who wasn't able to play, a guy who limped his way off the field and never suited up for the Nittany Lions again. So here's hoping that he's able to come back. If Penn State ends up making the playoff, Penn State could handle the next month or so, month, 2 months, whatever of the season without him, and he's able to come back and he's able to give it a go one more time for Penn State. It's always unfair to see this happen to anyone. Really unfair to see this happen to a guy like KJ. But here's hoping that his story as a Nittany Lion is not finished at this point. Let's move on to talking about what Penn State has this week. Like we mentioned, like I mentioned, Penn State is going into a game against a Kent State team not especially good. Struggled in its first year under Kenny Burns, struggling in its second year under Kenny Burns. ESPN puts out its bottom, everyone does their top 25 or whatever. ESPN does the bottom 10 every week. And this week, Kent State was their worst team in college football. In SP Plus, Bill Connolly's predictive metric for every team in the nation, Kent State comes in 134th out of 134 teams in FBS. Bill also ranks just every team in college football. All 764 of them between FBS, FCS, Division II, Division III. I think NAIA might also be in there. And Kent State comes in at 187th out of 764 teams, behind a number of FCS teams, a number of D2 teams, and even one Division III team. Coming into this game, they are 0-3. And the bookending losses on that aren't that bad. Losing to Pitt 55-24. It was 28-21 in the third quarter. Pitt ends up pulling away. Okay, that happens. Last week, they got a whooping from Tennessee. They lost 71-0 in Neyland Stadium. Tennessee was up 65-0 at halftime. That obviously sucks, but that's kind of what you expect. Maybe not by that margin, but that's kind of what you expect when a MAC team goes to play a team like Tennessee. Tennessee can put up points on anyone. The big concern is what happened in between those two games, where they played St. Francis of Pennsylvania, an FCS program, and lost 23-17. So they're 0-3 with two Power 5 losses and an FCS loss in there. St. Francis, not exactly a powerhouse at the FCS level. They are actually 1-2 on the year, with their only win coming over Kent State. They lost by 8 to Dayton and 7 to Central Connecticut. So this is not an especially great Kent State team. I do think they're going to come out a little feisty, especially after how last week went, which is something we'll talk about a little bit later in the pod. But for Penn State, over the years, had some trouble getting off to some pretty slow starts after its bye weeks. I don't think that's going to happen again. This is happening in a game where on the there are just a lot of changes that are happening with this Penn State team. We'll see if Caden Saunders ends up playing a more prominent role after not I believe he hasn't taken the field at wide receiver this year. He's been exclusively a special teams guy. We'll see what ends up happening with him. We'll see what ends up happening with a guy like Katron Allen, who is shaking up those last little bits of rust. We'll see what happens with some of the depth options on offense who didn't get as much run as one might expect against a team like Bowling Green, because that game ended up being a little bit closer than you'd expect. And then there's the other side of the football, where Penn State's going to be folding in a guy like Tamir Robinson, getting him back into the fold if he is indeed able to go. Obviously, everything we just talked about with KJ Winston, figuring out its secondary and how they're going to respond to the fact that one of the best players on the team is not going to be there. Penn State's pass rush, big point of contention, big point of focus and emphasis among Penn State fans, because it's only generated 2 sacks through the first 2 games of the season. Some reasons, some of that's not necessarily their fault. Bowling Green getting the ball out lightning quick. West Virginia and Bowling Green both having really good offensive lines. But they've had an extra week. They've had 2 weeks of a defensive line, especially off the edge, where it's guys who are figuring things out, getting up to speed to playing this much. This is an opportunity for them to come out and really pad their stats a little bit. I think this is something I said to Matt on a recent episode of the podcast. They come out and they get 7 sacks against Kent State, and I don't necessarily think anyone's going to be complaining too terribly much about the pass rush. But I do think, just as a general thing, whether it's offense, whether it's defense, probably not with special teams. Special teams are always a different story. I think no matter the case, it's very important not to take too terribly much away from this game in particular. Penn State should be able to roll its third stringers out there and beat Kent State. No disrespect to Kent State. They're a team that is rebuilding, figuring a lot of stuff out in the second year of a new coach. But if you are the team that Penn State wants to be, you need to be able to just win this football game. If you're not the team that Penn State wants to be, you can then start to take some conclusions away from this about maybe we just came into this game a little bit too came into the season a little bit too optimistic, or this or this or this or this. But when Penn State puts its 11 best players on offense out there, should be able to take care of business. Now, it can look really pretty. We can start to see things that give us some encouragement right before the start of the Big Ten slate. But if Penn State gets 4 sacks against Kent State, I'm going to insist that people do not jump to conclusions about the pass rush being fixed. If DeJuan Wayne has a really nice game, obviously we could take something from that. We can give him a lot of praise. I don't think that necessarily means he stepped in and immediately replaced and lived up to the standard set by KJ Winston. If a guy like Caden Saunders catches, 9 balls for 110 yards and 2 touchdowns, I don't think that suddenly means he's like the second coming of, Amon-Ra St. Brown or anything like that. I think he just had a good game against a not great opponent, and it gives stuff to build on. I think that's how I'm going to approach this game, and I'm going to encourage you to approach this game the same way. Does this game give Penn State stuff to build on as the schedule starts to get more difficult? Starting next week against an interesting Illinois team. If you want to make big sweeping conclusions, if you want to say this is great, this is great, this is great, this is terrible, this is terrible, this is terrible, totally your prerogative. Do that. I'm going to make caution that everyone tempers their expectations a bit, because this is a game where Penn State should go out and do some very, very specific things. And I want to see them go out and do those very, very specific things. And we will get into what those very specific things are on both sides of the football here in 1 second. But before I do that, I want to tell you about our sponsor, Home Field Apparel. Home Field has been our sponsor ever since we decided to go podcast only a couple of years ago. If you want it, Home Field Apparel has it. They are one of the best, if not the best, premium collegiate apparel brand in the game right now. I know my wardrobe, it's always had a ton of Penn State stuff in it. Plenty of Nike stuff, and Nike, obviously, there's something about just like that blue Nike Penn State shirt that we all have, we all love. But that stuff can all start to look the same after a while. Home Field Apparel takes pride in not looking like anything else that you have in your collection, whether that is one of their t-shirts, whether that is a hoodie or a crew neck or a bomber jacket. They released a new blue jacket this week that absolutely gorgeous. Whatever you want, Home Field Apparel has. And this doesn't just apply to Penn State. If you're a Kent State fan who found this podcast and wants to learn a little bit about Penn State, Home Field Apparel has an unbelievable Kent State collection. I'm by no means am I a Kent State fan, but I would love to get my hands on some of the Kent State stuff that Home Field Apparel has. If you went to a school other than Penn State or Kent State, if someone you love went to a school other than Penn State or Kent State, I highly encourage you to head over to Home Field Apparel, check out what they have for that school, potentially pick something up. Holidays are only a couple months away. Christmas is a little more than 3 months away. Might as well get some holiday shopping done from Home Field Apparel. And if you would like to get some Home Field Apparel stuff for yourself, for someone else, whomever, and you've never purchased from them before, you can use the promo code RLR24 to get 15% off of your first order from Home Field Apparel. Again, promo code is RLR24 for 15% off of your first order. Thank you to Home Field Apparel for sponsoring this episode of the pod. Thank you to Home Field Apparel for always sponsoring the pod. Let's get into talking about the two sides of the football in this game. And we'll start with what I want the focus to be when Penn State has the football. You guys have heard me for weeks talk about how I want to see Penn State use these games, Bowling Green and Kent State, UCLA, Washington, the games against lesser competition, to build up Drew Aller's confidence, let him pad his stats a little bit. And I wouldn't hate if they did that in this game by any stretch of the imagination. But I think this is a game where you can let Nick Singleton run the ball early and often, and it's going to pay off for you. You can let Katron Allen run the ball early and often and continue to get his body in a good place after missing time this offseason with injuries. Kent State coming into this game, 120th in opponent passer rating allowed. They're tied for 109th in yards per pass attempt at 8.9 yards allowed. The big thing is they are 131st in yards per rush allowed, 7.4 yards per rush, a not good number no matter how you slice it. And they've really struggled to bottle up every running game they've gone up against. This year, Pitt ran the ball 32 times for 201 yards, 6.3 yards per rush attempt. St. Francis, 47 runs, 207 yards, 4.4 yards per attempt. And then Kent State, not against Tennessee, who 55 carries for Tennessee, 456 yards, 8.3 yards per attempt, 6 rushing touchdowns in that game. I think this is a game where Penn State is going, for as much as I would love to see Drew Aller air it out, throw for 450 yards, 5 touchdowns, all that. I think Penn State's going to run the football. Let Nick Singleton pad his stats a little bit. Let a guy like Kaytron Allen, again, start to shake off some of the rust that he might have. But more importantly, a lot of run for Cam Wallace. Some good run for Quentin Martin and Corey Smith, your 2 true freshmen that you're very high on. And take advantage of the fact that the Bowling Green game was a bit closer than expected. You couldn't really rotate guys in. You couldn't really let guys get a taste of college football. I think the running game is a really good example of a place where they can run it early with their starters, but limit the number of hits that guys like Singleton and Allen take, and let those backups, let those younger dudes really get a sense for what it's like being a running back in the world of college football. And that doesn't just apply for the running backs. Like a good amount of Bo Prabula in this game, that would make a ton of sense to me. Let Ethan Grunkemeyer throw the football a little bit when it's the fourth quarter and Penn State should be up big. Yeah, I think that would be a really good decision and a good way for a guy like Grunk to, see that first pass get completed, show some command of the offense, all those sorts of things. And then you just look throughout Penn State's offense. Could this be a game where we see a good amount of Cooper Cousins? Could this be a game where we see a good amount of Alex Birchmeier, of Garrett Sexton, of Nolan Rucci, of Javen Williams? These younger dudes who we're seeing this with the safety room right now. You're one injury away from having to really reshuffle what you're doing. Get these guys some, I'm going to say high leverage reps, even though they're not necessarily going to be high. They shouldn't necessarily be high leverage in a game against Kent State. But get those guys some high leverage reps. Get in the tight end room, Luke Reynolds, get him out there, get him playing a lot of football, limit the number of hits that a guy like Tyler Warren has to take, and let Luke Reynolds get a little bit of experience at this level. We'll see if a guy like Khalil Dinkins plays a lot, a guy like Joey Schlafer or a guy like Jerry Cross, whomever it might be, the guys that you could end up needing to rely on down the road. Wide receiver is just like, let Liam Clifford catch a football. Let Julian Fleming catch a football. Let Tyseer Denmark, Caden Saunders, Tyler Johnson, Anthony Ivey, Mekhi Flowers, insert name here. Let these guys see what it's like to play college football. A guy like Caden Saunders in particular, I'd like to see play a lot if he is healthy, just to kind of catch up, get a little bit of rust off of him. But this is a game where you didn't get the opportunity to do this against Bowling Green. Sucks. Ultimately, that's fine. This is a game where you score early, you score often, and you get guys reps. You get guys the opportunity to play football. And a thing that we've heard James Franklin talk about over the last however many weeks is the importance of letting multiple guys get the football, touch the football, do things with the football. There is something to, I completely understand. Feed the ball to Tyler Warren, feed the ball to Trey Wallace. They are your studs. There is definitely something to, if you just have guys coast through games and never expect that they're going to get the ball, there may come a day where you have to get them the football, where they are the best opportunity for you to get the football, and they're just not able to do it. And they're just not able to get open. They're just not able to bring in the catch because they haven't had that opportunity throughout the season. It keeps guys engaged. It keeps guys feeling a good example of this. Last year against Ohio State, Penn State's final offensive drive after, the game was basically done and dusted by this point. Absolutely brutal day for everyone on Penn State's offense. Drew Allar throws a touchdown pass to Caden Saunders. And you just saw, even though it was in a really tough situation, there was a big smile on Caden Saunders' face. He looked lively. He looked bouncy. He looked excited on the sideline. That's something that matters. It matters that you are able to get guys feeling like they're an engaged, important part of the offense. And this is the kind of game where I'm interested to see if Andy Kotelnicki schemes up targets for Julian Fleming, schemes up targets for Caden Saunders, schemes up targets for Liam Clifford. I think Clifford and Fleming are two guys who, they're willing to put their hard hats on and go to work no matter what, but it's still good to reward their commitment to the offense, reward all that dirty work that they put in. And you look at who Kent State has in its defense. They have a good edge rusher. Their top edge rusher, Cameron Olds, has 3 sacks, which is more than Penn State has. Pair of good players in their secondary, no relation. Dallas and Alex Branch, one is a corner, one is a safety. But they're guys that Penn State that shouldn't be able to derail Penn State's entire game plan, especially easily. So that's what I want to see out of Penn State's offense. I want to see them do the thing James Franklin wants them to do, which is get guys involved, get guys feeling involved, give guys that little extra pep in their step so that, it's a 3rd and 5, ball near midfield. Penn State needs to convert against Illinois or USC or Ohio State or Wisconsin or whomever it might be. If the ball has to go to Caden Saunders is going to just be locked in because he has been locked in for weeks. If it has to go to Liam Clifford or Julian Fleming or Luke Reynolds, whomever it might be, you're not in a situation like a few years ago against Michigan where it was a, 4th down. I think it was in 2021. It was a 4th down. Penn State had to convert, and they went to Cam Sullivan Brown. No disrespect to Cam Sullivan Brown of the television show Big Brother. The fun thing about Cam Sullivan Brown, he doesn't know who's running for president because he's been in the Big Brother house this entire time. I find that very funny. But when you go to a guy like that who has not been a big part of what you've been trying to do, the play's DOA before the ball's even snapped. Use this game as an opportunity to have a better chance down the road is what I want to see Penn State do. I trust they're going to be able to put points up. I trust they're going to be able to move the ball. I think they're going to be fine in this football game. The interesting thing is on the other side of the football, I think they could be a little bit more fast and loose on the offensive side of the football with getting a lot of guys reps. I think on defense, they need to be a little bit more judicious. Obviously, you have to keep your core guys healthy. You have to keep Reed, Wheatley, Rojas, Carter, all your dudes, a defensive tackle, your dudes, whoever. You have to keep them healthy. Obviously, a crucial part of this game. But at the same time, I think it's important to get, with how much turnover there has been on the defensive side of the football, you need to get more run for, Jalen Reed if he's going to be playing a new position, Zaki Wheatley if he's going to have a new dude at the back of the defense lining up next to him, whomever they put into that slot hybrid role. For the linebackers, as they're continuing to develop as a group, for the edge rushers, as they are continuing to develop as a group, you need to be able to find that perfect balance between, we know we can't afford another injury to any of our core 6 or 7 guys on defense, especially, but we need them to play a lot. We need them to be able to show that with all these moving parts, they could still play to the standard of, I think it was either Kobe King or Javonte Thomas, apologies, who said this week. The standard is still, we want to be the number 1 defense in the country. You need to be able to show that you could still live up to that standard, even with such a crucial piece of the puzzle not being in there. And obviously part of this, I would love to see Tamir Robinson get on the field a lot, start to shake off some of that rust. I would love to see DeJuan Wayne get on the field, play a lot, play well, start to make Penn State fans optimistic that they're going to be able to survive without KJ Winston at the back end of the defense. But above all else, find that balance early, rely on it, and hope that by the time you go to the locker room, listen, I don't think Penn State is going to be like Tennessee and be up 65-0 at halftime. But put yourselves in a situation where by the time you go into the locker room, you could then start to say, all right, we're going to mix and match starters with reserve guys, guys who we might have to rely on to play a lot of football as the year goes on, blah, blah, like that sort of thing. It's also important that Penn State's pass rush ends up getting home. And worth mentioning that to start the year, Kent State, 5 sacks allowed against Pitt, 1 against St. Francis, none against Tennessee. Tennessee did not get home, but they did end up playing just a remarkable amount of guys on the defensive side of the football. So my hunch, I didn't get a chance to dive in too terribly closely, was their top guys, their top edge rusher, James Pierce, is a guy who's going to be going in very high in the 2025 NFL draft. My guess is their top guys didn't play all that much. My guess is Kent State did a lot of, taking a harm reduction approach, I would say, to the offense. On offense, yeah, they threw the ball 16 times. They ran it 32 times. 3.6 yards per attempt through the air, 1.7 yards on the ground. Just like bad day for them altogether. But I mentioned this earlier in the podcast. I don't think if they suddenly get 7 sacks against Kent State, everyone's going to think Penn State's defense is going to Penn State's pass rush is fixed. But I kind of liken it to what James Franklin has been talking about on offense with getting guys involved, getting guys the football, letting them feel like they're a part of it. It'd provide one hell of a, it provide a bit of a pep in Abdul Carter's step and deny Dennis Sutton's step, whomever's step, if they're able to get that first sack, their first sack of the season. It would a little bit of a boost of confidence, a little bit of a boost of energy. These sorts of things that could be a little bit hard coming off of a bye to gin up. If on that first drive, Abdul Carter gets home, I think he's going to have like a National Player of the Week level game. Like he has that in him. He is still learning the position, and I think he'll get to a point where we see him have a monster game. If he's able to establish early on, he is able to get the job done. But that's more what I want to see than anything out of Penn State. If Penn State's pass rush basically makes it so the pocket collapses right away, and Kent State's quarterback is throwing up ducks and, praying, and it leads to turnovers, I think that's fine too. But I would really like to see them start getting home. I would like to see the splash plays on the defensive side of the football that were a staple of Penn State's defense under Manny Diaz. We start to see more of that under Tom Allen while they start to figure out the personnel stuff that they've now had 2 weeks to start to figure out. Next week against Illinois is going to be a really interesting challenge for them. So start to figure out who your guys are going to be heading into a home night game against Illinois, or possibly a home night game against Illinois. I apologize for speaking out of turn there. James Franklin has spoken, and I think a few coaches and players have also spoken this past week about the issues with getting play calls in when you're on defense because of how loud the stadium is. That's going to be the case against Illinois. And starting to get a little bit more comfortable with that stuff against Kent State would also be pretty nice. As for who Kent State has on offense, funny enough, kind of like Illinois in that their passing game is built around having a pair of 2 really good receivers in Luke Flourier and Krishan McCray. Pair of guys who have been productive this year. Flourier, 15 receptions, 209 yards and 2 scores. McCray, 12, 121 and 2 scores. They have 27 receptions. The team has 46 in total. So they're going to get the ball fed to them in the passing game. I think it's pretty safe to say. Their top running back is a guy named Kai Thomas, who played at Minnesota and Kansas before transferring this year. I actually did play at Kansas under Andy Kotelnicki last season. Ran the ball 53 times, 162 yards, and a pair of scores under Kotelnicki last year. Gotten off to a bit of a slow start this year, 36 carries, 89 yards, 2.5 yards per attempt. No touchdowns for their entire team on the ground, which, Pitt and Tennessee, you're not going to find too much joy on the ground against them. Quarterback troubles have, as you're doing your research into Kent State, really is interesting. Devin Cargman has been their top quarterback, but struggled. He's listed as a co-starter with a guy named Tommy Uladowski, who played for them a bit down the stretch last season and looked like he was doing a nice job. Looked like, some of the speculation was that he was going to be the guy coming into this season. Cargman has been the guy for them. He's thrown 81 of their 83 pass attempts. On the year, Cargman completed 55.6% of his attempts, 432 yards, 5.3 yards per attempt, 3 touchdowns to 2 interceptions, has taken 6 sacks, as previously mentioned. So an offense that has not had a lot of success on the ground or in the air. 5.4 yards per attempt as a team is tied for 113th nationally. 1.2 yards per rush is 133rd nationally. So it is an offense that Penn State should be able to impose itself against. Like, you go back to the Bowling Green game and you look going into the game. Okay, how could Bowling Green potentially challenge Penn State? How could Bowling Green take it to Penn State? Veteran quarterback in Connor Bazelak, who's played a ton of football, knows what he's doing, not going to be intimidated by going into a Big Ten stadium. A pair of really good running backs in Terrion Stewart and Jason Patterson, who have been pretty productive during their time at Bowling Green. A really good offensive line, really good tight end, Harold Fannin Jr., a good top receiver in Malcolm Johnson Jr. Like, in retrospect, you could piece together the ways that Bowling Green could have given Penn State some trouble. It's really hard to do that with Kent State. And going into this game, SP Plus's projection is that Penn State is going to win this game 50-0. Our friends out in the desert has Penn State as a 49.5 point favorite, has the total in this game at 55.5. They think Penn State's going to score a lot. They don't think Bowling Green is going to score a lot, if at all. And I generally think that, I'm in the same place with that one. I think Penn State's going to go out. Maybe they get off to a little bit of a slow start because of the bye. Maybe Kent State is feisty. Again, really embarrassed last week at Neyland Stadium. Maybe they come out a little bit feisty, a little bit more aggressive than you might expect. And it kind of compounds a slow start for Penn State. But I don't think this is going to be anything like the Bowling Green game. I think this is going to be like some other non-conference games Penn State has played in the past couple of years. Last year against Delaware is a good example of that. Penn State won that game 63-7. Last year against Kent State, Penn State gets off to a little bit of a slow start. 7-0 after 28-0 at halftime, and then just pours it on en route to a 63-0 win. Go back to 2022, poured it on against Ohio, 46-10. I think this game is in a very similar ballpark to that. I don't think Kent State scores in this game. If they do score, it's off of a Penn State mistake, whether that is a poorly timed turnover that gets them the ball in good field position, whether that is, something like Delaware's first and only touchdown last year, where one guy just makes a block, one Penn State guy doesn't fill a gap correctly, and next thing you know, someone is off to the races. But other than that, I don't think Kent State is going to be able to sustain a drive that ends in points against Penn State, barring Penn State accidents or mistakes. I'm going to go in this game. Let's see. I will go with Penn State 62. So 56 points off of touchdowns and then 2 field goals for Sanders to Haydick. Kent State, I'll give them 3 points. I think they get a field goal at some point in this game. I don't think this game should be especially competitive. I think that if Penn State is a team that we think can be a national title contender, can be a team that doesn't just make the playoff, but make some noise in the playoff, they have to come out and they have to take care of business at 3:30 on the Big Ten Network in their own building. And I'm optimistic they will. I'm optimistic that this is going to be a good Saturday for Penn State. I'm optimistic that they're going to be able to figure out how they're going to replace KJ Winston, what they have in various other parts, or start to figure out what they have in KJ Winston and figure out other parts of their offense and their defense going into what could be a tricky game against Illinois. Illinois is 3-0 on the year. They have to go to Nebraska this weekend, which is going to be tough, but should be an interesting game. Like I still think we don't know a ton about Illinois or Nebraska, and that game is going to be really instructive in that regard. But Penn State takes care of business against Kent State, beats Illinois. They're going to beat UCLA at home. And next thing you know, we're talking about a 5-0 Nittany Lion team before they go into the difficult part of their schedule. These next 3 games are important. It starts off on Saturday afternoon with this game against Kent State, one that I think Penn State is going to have some fun in. I would like to see this be a pretty fun afternoon for the Nittany Lions. That's it for this edition of the podcast. I can't think of anything else that doesn't involve making fun of Arsenal that I could be doing right here. So thank you, as always, for listening to the pod. Hope this solo show was worth the copious amounts of money that all of you pay our overlords at Spotify to be able to listen to our podcast. On that note, make sure you subscribe wherever you go and get your podcast, whether it's Spotify, whether it's Apple Podcasts. Leave us a 5-star review. If you can, leave us a 5-star review. If you like using YouTube, head over to YouTube and hop into the comments, talk with Penn State fans and whomever else shows up in the YouTube comments. And again, make sure you subscribe to us over there as well. Make sure you give us a follow on Twitter at RLRblog. And as always, thank you very much to our sponsor, Home Field Apparel. Use that promo code RLR24 to get 15% off of your first order. One last time, thank you very much for listening to this edition of Roar Lions Roar. I'm Bill DeFilippo. Take care, everyone.